It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. I'd settled into my favorite reading chair with a cup of chamomile tea and a book I'd been meaning to finish for weeks. The house was quiet, the kind of peaceful silence that comes after decades of living in the same place, where every creak and whisper feels like an old friend. Then came the knock, not urgent, but hesitant. The kind of knock that says, "I'm not sure I should be here." When I opened the door, I found my grandson standing on the porch, looking like a storm cloud had followed him home. David was 35 now, but in that moment, with his shoulders hunched and his eyes avoiding mine, he looked exactly like the 10-year-old boy who used to show up at my door after difficult days at school. "Grandma," he said quietly, "is this a bad time?" I stepped aside immediately. "For you? Never." He came in slowly, as if testing whether he was still welcome in a place he'd known his entire life. The hardwood floors announced his presence with their familiar song, the same sounds that had greeted his mother as a child, and me as a young bride all those years ago. David paused in the hallway, his gaze sweeping over the walls lined with family photographs. He stopped at one particular picture, my late husband Robert, captured on our anniversary trip to the mountains. Robert's expression in that photo was pure contentment, the face of a man completely at peace with who he was. "I've been thinking about Grandpa lately," David said softly, "how he carried himself, like he'd figured out something the rest of us are still searching for." Robert had been gone nearly 15 years. David had been barely out of college when we lost him. The observation surprised me. "What made you think of him?" I asked gently. David shrugged, still studying the photograph, the way he seemed comfortable in his own skin. Like he didn't need permission to be himself. "I don't think I understood that when I was younger." I settled into my chair, sensing we were approaching something important. David finally sat on the sofa across from me, his posture rigid, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. "I've been struggling," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "And you're the only person I could think to talk to about it." My heart opened toward this young man who so rarely let anyone see past his carefully constructed walls. "Then let's talk. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." He exhaled slowly, searching for words. "It feels like I'm standing at the edge of something important, but there's this invisible barrier I can't get past, and I can't even explain what it's made of." I recognized that feeling. The paralysis that comes from fear, from carrying too many expectations, from forgetting who you are beneath all the roles you play. "That's not unusual," I told him. "You're not stuck, David. You're just at a crossroads. Maybe you need someone to tell you it's okay to choose your own direction." His shoulders dropped slightly, tension releasing. "I knew you'd understand." We talked for over 2 hours. He opened up about his career in finance, about the pressure to maintain appearances, about feeling like an actor in his own life rather than the author of it. The afternoon light shifted and dimmed as his words poured out, thoughts he'd been holding inside for who knows how long. At one point, I reached across and took his hand. He held on, not desperately but firmly, like someone anchoring themselves. It was such a simple gesture, yet it bridged years of polite distance between us. "I don't know where I'm going," David said finally, "but I'm exhausted from just existing instead of actually living." I squeezed his hand, then stopped waiting for permission. Life moves forward whether we're ready or not. I learned that the hard way. When he left that evening, something had shifted. His walk seemed lighter, more purposeful. I watched him disappear down the street until the twilight swallowed him whole. Closing the door, I knew this wasn't the end of our conversation. It was just the beginning. The rain came 3 nights later, soft and insistent, the kind that settles in for hours. I was reading by lamplight when headlights swept across my window, followed by that now familiar knock. David stood on my porch, rain streaming down his face, his business shirt soaked through. "I'm sorry for showing up so late," he said. "I was driving and I just needed somewhere that felt safe." I pulled him inside without a word. He stepped onto the old welcome mat, water pooling around his shoes, and stood there looking lost. "Let me get you a towel," I said, "and I'll make tea." He nodded gratefully and sank onto the sofa while I moved to the kitchen. There's something meditative about making tea properly. Heating the kettle just so, selecting the right blend, waiting for the water to reach the perfect temperature. Each small action traded urgency for calm. When I returned with steaming mugs, David had removed his wet jacket and was staring at the antique clock on the mantel, the one that had belonged to my father, the one that ran 3 minutes slow unless you wound it with exactly the right pressure. "I've been thinking about time," David said without looking away from the clock. "How it feels different depending on what you're carrying." I set down the tea tray. "What are you carrying tonight?" He wrapped his hands around the warm mug, letting the steam fog his glasses. When he met my eyes, all his usual guardedness had vanished. "Fear," he said quietly, "and regret, and expectations that are crushing me." I waited, giving him space. 7 decades of living teaches you that people need room to land safely when they're finally ready to leap. Something happened at work, he continued. My boss called it underperformance. I called it finally noticing I couldn't breathe anymore, so I walked out. Didn't give notice, didn't plan it, I just left. And when I got outside, I had no idea where to go. He sipped his tea, his hands trembling slightly. My feet brought me here, rain whispered against the windows, a gentle rhythm that seemed to hold us both. I'm sorry you had such a difficult day, I said. But I'm glad your instincts remembered this address. A small, bitter smile touched his lips. I don't know who I'm supposed to be anymore, Grandma. That word, supposed. I'd watched him carry it like ill-fitting armor his entire life, always trying to be the perfect grandson, the reliable son, the one who solved problems quietly and never caused trouble. Can I show you something? I asked. He nodded, and I stood, ignoring my protesting knees. I led him down the hallway to the small room at the back of the house, Robert's old workshop. It still smelled like him. Wood shavings, old books, and that indefinable sweetness of sawdust and time. After Robert died, I kept this door closed for 6 months. Then one morning, I opened it, dusted everything, and began teaching myself the names of his tools. The room remained exactly as he'd left it. Chisels organized by size, a hand plane with a worn handle, jars of screws labeled in Robert's precise handwriting. On the far shelf sat a small wooden box no one had ever asked about. I lifted it down and placed it on the workbench. I made this after he passed, I explained. Took me 3 weeks to sand the corners smooth. My first and only woodworking project. The lid creaked open to reveal a stack of folded index cards, yellowed with age, bound with twine. David looked at me questioningly. Notes, I said. Robert used to leave me little messages, in the bread box when we'd argued, tucked in my coat pocket when I seemed tired. After he was gone, I found blank cards and started writing my own. Not to him exactly, but to future versions of myself who might need reminding of certain truths. I offered him the top card. He read it silently, and something in his face softened. What does it say? I asked. He held it so I could see. You are allowed to be uncertain. Rest anyway. Begin anyway. We stood there with the card between us, rain drumming on the roof. David reached for another card, read it, then carefully slipped both into his shirt pocket. Can I tell you what's really underneath all this? He said, his voice dropping. I don't want the life I've built. And I'm terrified of what everyone will think if I dismantle it. I leaned against the workbench, feeling the old wood press into my side. I could have offered advice, shared stories, wrapped my response in tidy wisdom. But what I remembered most from my own hardest seasons wasn't what people told me. It was that they stayed. What if we don't label it yet? I suggested. What if we make a small plan that won't overwhelm you? He almost laughed. A small plan? Yes. First you sleep. The guest room is already made up. Tomorrow we eat something nourishing. After that, we write down 3 things you don't want and 3 things you do want. Then we take one tiny step that honors that list. No announcements, no big decisions, just movement. He was quiet for so long I could hear the clock in the living room marking time with its patient rhythm. Finally, David said, I haven't slept properly in weeks. Then let's start there. He stood in the doorway of the guest room like he used to as a boy, uncertain, vulnerable, waiting for permission to take up space. Do you ever feel guilty about resting? He asked. All the time, I admitted. So I practiced not apologizing to my pillow. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. When I turned off the light and left the door slightly open, I felt the weight of responsibility settle gently on my shoulders. Not burden, but purpose. Back in the living room, I pulled out a fresh index card and wrote 3 things he doesn't want: to be praised for work that empties him, to keep pretending exhaustion is normal, to be the family's dependable ghost. 3 things he does want: to create things with his hands, to have conversations that feel meaningful, to wake without dread. I propped the card against the clock so I'd remember to share it in the morning. Sometime after midnight, I woke to soft footsteps. David stood in the living room doorway, his hair mussed, wearing the unsettled look people get when their minds won't release their grip. Couldn't sleep? I asked. I keep hearing voices, he said. My boss, my father, my own. They're all telling me different things, and I don't want to be unfair to anyone. They all just want what's best for me. He was right about that. Love and pressure often wear identical coats. Come sit, I said, patting the cushion beside me. I taught him a breathing technique a therapist had shown me during Robert's illness, when my heart felt like a trapped bird. Breathe in slowly for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Exhale for 6. We practiced together in the quiet room, finding rhythm, finding stillness. After several rounds, his chest relaxed visibly. He rubbed his palms together, looking slightly embarrassed. It's strange, he said. I'm 35 years old and learning to breathe from my grandmother. Lucky you, I replied. I happen to be excellent at it. He laughed softly. His gaze drifted to the mantel where Robert's photograph watched with that gentle smile. I miss him, David sighed. I didn't know him the way you did, but I keep wondering what he'd say about all this. He'd say there's no prize for how long you can hold your breath, I told him. He'd say to take care of his people, and by his people he'd mean both of us. We sat until the slow clock reminded us to try sleeping again. This time David yawned and headed back down the hall without hesitation. I woke just after 6 to the smell of rain easing and that peculiar stillness that comes when a storm has made peace with morning. In the kitchen, I sliced fruit and made toast. When David shuffled in, he looked both younger and older somehow, like someone who'd shed a costume they'd been wearing too long. I placed a plate before him and he ate like someone who'd been granted unexpected grace. I kept this, he said, pulling out the index card from yesterday. It helped. I made another list, I said, handing him the one from the clock. He read it carefully, then read it again, as if mapping himself against the words. This last one. Waking without dread. I don't even know what that looks like. You can borrow one of my days, I offered. You can belong to mine for now. It starts with going to the workshop and choosing something small to fix. His eyebrows lifted. Fix something? There's a drawer in there that's been stuck for months. We stood shoulder to shoulder at Robert's bench. I showed David how to run candle wax along the edges, how to check for swelling in the wood, how to press and listen, to let the object tell you what's wrong instead of forcing compliance. It's a lesson applicable to many things. He loosened a screw, sanded a whisper off the side, and the drawer glided smoothly with the dignity of a well-made thing. There, I said. The universe is already slightly improved. He looked at his hands, surprised. I forgot how this feels. What? Making something cooperate. Without conquering it. He stayed most of the morning. He called his father from the porch, not an argument, just a quiet boundary set with love. He returned looking both relieved and tender, as if the world had leaned closer instead of pulling away. We took a slow walk around the block. The neighborhood wore the colors of wet bark and autumn leaves. A child on a tricycle splashed through puddles and waved at us like we were old friends. When we returned, David asked to hear a story about Robert I'd never told anyone. So I told him about our first winter as newlyweds, when the heating failed during a blizzard. Robert rigged up a contraption with a fan and space heater to funnel warm air down the hallway. We ate soup on the floor by the bedroom doorway because it was the only spot where you couldn't see your breath. He looked ridiculous, I said, but he kept saying we're warm enough like it was a sacred promise. David laughed openly, then grew quiet. Grandma, he said finally, what if I don't go back to that job? Then you don't. What if I disappoint people? You will, I said simply. And they'll recover. Your life isn't a committee project. He studied my face. How did you learn to say things like that? By staying alive, I said, and by loving people who didn't always approve of how I chose to stay alive. He reached across the table. Not for my hand this time, but for the index card. He turned it over and wrote something on the back. When he slid it toward me, I read, meet every Thursday, build something, talk like it matters. I can do Thursdays, he said. Even if I have to find temporary work while I figure things out, I can do Thursdays. Then on Thursdays, I said, we'll be carpenters of more than just wood. He flushed slightly, a little embarrassed by sentiment, but he nodded, slow and serious. Before he left, he stood at the doorway one last. Only now, he folded me into a hug that wasn't careful or brief. It was steady and grateful, speaking things neither of us needed to say aloud. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For not making me make sense, he said. Just for giving me tea and time. I watched him walk down the path with a stride that didn't apologize for itself. The sky had cleared completely. My neighbor's oak tree held sunlight between its leaves like captured gold. I stood in the quiet of the house for a while, then returned to the workshop. I opened the repair drawer, sliding it in and out, enjoying the sound, a gentle confirmation. On the bench sat the wooden box of notes. I added a new card in the same firm script I'd used for grocery lists and permission slips and messages to a future I couldn't yet see. You can change without vanishing. You can rest without failing. Love is the room we build to return to. I placed the card beneath the others and closed the lid. In the stillness that followed, I heard the house exhale, and I realized something simple but profound. The remarkable thing wasn't that my grandson had arrived unannounced, or even that he'd asked for help. The remarkable thing was that we let ourselves be known. And once that happens, once you give someone permission to see you as you truly are, confused, scared, imperfect, searching, ordinary days are never quite ordinary again. 6 months passed. True to his word, David came every Thursday, We fixed things, we talked, we sat in comfortable silence. Sometimes we cooked together, and sometimes we just walked through the neighborhood noticing things we'd overlooked before. The way afternoon light caught in spider webs, the sound of wind chimes 3 houses down, the elderly couple who walked their ancient dog at exactly 4 o'clock every day. David found work as a freelance consultant, something that let him choose his projects and set his own boundaries. He looked lighter now, like someone who'd put down luggage they'd been carrying too long. One Thursday in early spring, as we sat on the porch, watching evening settle over the neighborhood, David pulled something from his pocket. It was the wooden box from Robert's workshop. "You gave this to me?" I asked, surprised. "Last week," he said. "You told me to take it. Said you'd started a new one." I had no memory of this, but I trusted him. Memory is tricky at my age, slipping away like water through fingers. He opened it, and inside were dozens of new cards, some in my handwriting, some in his. "I've been adding my own," he said quietly. "Things I need to remember, things I want to tell myself when I forget." He handed me one. I read it aloud. "Grandma taught me that healing isn't linear. Some Thursdays you fix drawers. Some Thursdays you just breathe. Both matter." My eyes filled with tears. "You've become quite the philosopher." "I had a good teacher," he said. We sat together as the stars emerged, one by one, like promises being kept. The night was cool but not cold. Somewhere down the street, someone was playing piano, scales at first, then a melody that floated through the darkness like a lullaby. "I never thanked you properly," David said. "For what? For not giving up on me, for creating space where I could fall apart safely, for showing me that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom." I took his hand, the same way I had that first afternoon 6 months ago. "You did the hard part. You showed up. You told the truth. You chose yourself." "We chose each other," he corrected gently, and he was right. This hadn't been about me saving him or him needing me. It had been about 2 people deciding to be present for each other, to build something together out of honesty and love and Thursday afternoons. "Same time next week?" David asked, standing to leave. "I'll be here," I said. "I'm always here." He kissed my forehead, then walked to his car. Before he drove away, he rolled down the window. "Hey, Grandma?" "Yes?" "I woke up without dread this morning. Just thought you should know." My heart swelled so large I thought it might crack open. "That's the best news I've heard all week." He waved once, then disappeared into the night. I stayed on the porch for a long time after he left, listening to the piano music drift through the darkness, feeling the cool spring air on my face. Inside the house, Robert's clock ticked its patient rhythm, running 3 minutes slow the way it always had. And I thought about how strange and beautiful life could be. How the hardest seasons often planted seeds for the most unexpected growth. How sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is simply showing up, staying present, and believing in them when they've forgotten how to believe in themselves. David was going to be okay. Better than okay. He was becoming himself, messy and imperfect and gloriously, authentically human. And every Thursday we'd sit together in Robert's workshop, fixing things that were broken and building things that were new, reminding each other that we were worthy of rest and grace and second chances. Because that's what love does. It creates space, it holds steady. It says you can change without vanish. And means it with every fiber of its being. I stood slowly, my knees protesting, and went inside. Tomorrow I'd write another note for the box, something about stars and spring and the particular bravery it takes to start over. But tonight, I'd simply sit with the joy of knowing that somewhere in this wide, complicated world, my grandson was driving home with lighter shoulders and a fuller heart. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.